Oh, I'm still recording. Oh, the camera's on. Camera's been on this whole time, huh? Yeah. Kick it. Ahoy, mateys, and welcome to This Week in Nickelodeon History. It's a pleasure to welcome you aboard. My name is Captain Eric, and on this week's episode, we're going to celebrate some Nickelodeon anniversaries that have taken place in between the time of February 5th to February 11th. And just this past week, I believe, live streamed for one of the first times. I think the first time I ever live streamed on YouTube was with the video game Smite and testing out the Danny Phantom skin in that game. But this past week, I had completely new equipment in my hands and was able to try out live streaming. A first test run of SpongeBob SquarePants Monopoly before the Cosmic Shake was able to install and unlock during the time of day of January 31st. And it was a great time. It was one of the first times, and I don't live stream often, but it was one of the first times where I was able to live stream myself in the capacity of, and being in this feeling of, I'm just on this couch, I'm with my friends hanging out, and we're just playing games, as I've done in the past. So I don't know if it was the atmosphere of being in a new home, new environment, new equipment, but something about it was different, and I look forward to more live streams in the future. It might be a good reason to get back into certain games because, personally, and this is me opening up a little bit, I feel like over the last few years, the love and passion that I have for video games has depleted to where it's not as enjoyable for certain titles as they once were. So I'm going to give it a shot as time goes on. I'm going to see how things go, and I really thank each and every one of you who has checked out those live streams and sent over your goodwill. Appreciate you. And now, time for the anniversaries. 32 years ago, on February 9th, 1991, The Adventures of Pete and Pete premiered on Nickelodeon. Created by Will McRobb and Chris Viscardi, the show ran for 3 seasons of 34 episodes, though we're not technically covering any of those episodes. Technically, before the series even premiered, there were 5 specials of The Adventures of Pete and Pete, and even before then, there were a bunch of shorts of The Adventures of Pete and Pete. You see, the show itself, the entire concept, started out as these tiny little interludes into this world that pretty much felt like a Twilight Zone episode every single time. It just felt like, I know the word fever dream is always brought up when talking about this show, but that was the feeling. Being a kid, having these stories in the summertime, the heat just basking on your skin, and you're not really knowing what you're seeing out there in the fields, but all of a sudden, there's an ice cream truck. There's a Mr. Tasty. And The Adventures of Pete and Pete could go literally anywhere they wanted to, and it made sense for this world. If you haven't ever seen the show in any capacity, I can't recommend it enough. So the entire show started out as a concept in between the shows that were airing on Nickelodeon, and even in those areas of commercial breaks. Nickelodeon wasn't just made up of complete commercials when the shows weren't airing. Sometimes they had shorts that they would air, and one of these concepts were The Adventures of Pete and Pete. There were 18 shorts that were made during, I believe, 1990 to 1991. I'm not really sure on when they started, but the first special, Valentine's Day Massacre, premiered on February 9th, 1991. The second special aired later that year in September of 1991. 1992 saw the release of 2 more Adventures of Pete and Pete specials, whereas 1993 had 1 special before the premiere of the series on November 28th, 1993. Anytime I've brought up The Adventures of Pete and Pete, on this channel or in any of my podcasts, I make the claim that out of all of the live-action Nickelodeon shows to ever exist, it's the one that gives off the most Nickelodeon energy, and I will always stick by that unless a show comes along that blows it out of the water. You may ask yourself, well, what is Nickelodeon energy? Is that something subjective? And it may be, but there's a feeling, something familiar, something original, creative. It can only exist on Nickelodeon. If you look at a piece of animation or a live-action show and you look at it and you can go, that can only exist on Nickelodeon, that is Nickelodeon energy. There are plenty of sitcoms that may be full of jokes and laughter and high production value, but it could be a sitcom that you could see on plenty of other networks, and it may not give its own original feeling. The Adventures of Pete and Pete, when you watch it, couldn't exist elsewhere. Possibly in 2023, there could be streaming services that would pick up a show like The Adventures of Pete and Pete, but in the early 90s, when you watched any bit of The Adventures of Pete and Pete, there was only one network, there was only one channel, one brand that you could possibly associate that show with, and that's Nickelodeon. That right there is the Nickelodeon energy I'm talking about. 30 years ago, on February 7th, 1993, one of the greatest game shows of all time came to its end, Double Dare! Double Dare, of course, hosted by the one, the only Marc Summers, the sloppiest game show on television, was created by Dee LeDuc, Michael Klinghoffer, Jeffrey Darby, Robert Mittenthal, and Debbie Beese, who created Family Double Dare. The show had a whopping 482 episodes in its run between 1986 and 1993 when it came to its end. Through its run on both Nickelodeon and in syndication on the Fox networks, Double Dare had many iterations, including Double Dare, Family Double Dare, Super Sloppy Double Dare, before eventually Family Double Dare making its way back to Nickelodeon after its run on Fox, before then ending its run in 1993. Regardless of its end in 1993, Double Dare would continue to live on in the hearts and minds of Nickelodeon fans worldwide. It really never left Nickelodeon screens, which is why in both the year 2000 and in 2018, Double Dare was brought back with new hosts and new concepts at its forefront, though at its core, Double Dare remained the same. The concept of Double Dare is simple. Two teams are pitted against each other in both trivia and physical challenges, earning points along the way, with the winning team with the most points at the end of round 2 earning their entry into what is known as the Slopsticle Course. The Slopsticle Course is, of course, the star of the show. It is the main event. It's what everybody is here for. It is a gauntlet of different gimmicks and things to do, like slides and tunnels of slime and messes, all to gain a flag. Each flag from one obstacle gains you entry into the next. Your team wants to finish this obstacle course as quickly as possible to earn yourself as many prizes as possible, and it's sweet victory at the end if you're able to gain that final flag. And let me tell you, no matter what concept of Double Dare, whether or not it's Family Double Dare, regular, Super Sloppy, 2000, rebooted, if it's a live show, the whole concept of Double Dare just works. It works for any generation, it works for any group of people. It's a fun time. If you haven't ever come across Double Dare in your lifetime, by all means, do yourself a favor, kick back, relax, and enjoy yourself a fun game show. The concept of Double Dare is by and large the star of the show, and it almost doesn't matter who is behind the podium here, but let me tell you, it does matter who they entrust to host the show. And all three that have hosted it successfully thus far have done a fantastic job. So regardless on if you grew up with Marc Summers, Jason Harris, or Liza Koshy, then you know how awesome Double Dare was. And honestly, Double Dare should continue for that older Nickelodeon audience in some way, even if it's a smaller, more compact version of it that can tour to breweries or other locations around the United States, around the world, something where everyone can experience Double Dare even if they don't have the money to. That way more people get to experience Double Dare in some fashion. There has to be a way to continue the legacy of Double Dare, even if it's not directly on television. There's something here. I'm not sure exactly what it is. Maybe I have to be the one to find that out, but you know what? It's there. There's something there. We just have to dig for it. There's treasure. We just have to dig. 21 years ago, on February 10th, 2002, Action League Now, the series, finished its run on Nickelodeon. Created by Robert Mittenthal, Will McRobb, and Albie Hike, the show ran for one season of 12 episodes. Action League Now, the series, was not technically an original series. It was all of the shorts that were made of Action League Now for Kablam, all packaged together in one half-hour series. On top of that, though, there were interludes in between these shorts that were made specifically for the series that were original for it. So, in its entirety, Action League Now, the series, is actually on Paramount Plus. So if you would like to see all of these episodes edited together in their, I guess, proper form of if you're just an Action League Now fan and you don't want to watch all of the Kablam episodes, you can watch the 12-episode run on Paramount Plus. The show is not a traditional animated show in any possible manner. It is made with what the creators call Chuckimation, which is the fusion of stop-motion animation and live-action shots of action figures being destroyed, being thrown at a wall and bursting into pieces, an action figure being dropped in a blender. And it's a live-action shot, but then it would cut over to other action figures moving and somewhat emoting while you would hear their voices but not see their lips move. There are a plethora of YouTubers out there who have made a living taking stuffed animals and action figures and giving them voices and talking off screen and having these characters interact with one another, and kids just gobble this kind of content up. I have no idea what is going on, but it's popular. There's something about real objects interacting with one another. When a kid sees it, they just can't get away from it. It locks their eyes in. Action League Now is one of the most popular segments on Kablam, which is why it got its own show. Out of all of the segments, it's the only Kablam show to have its own series proper, although, as I've mentioned, it has no original episodes other than those little interludes. But once again, if you have no idea what Action League Now is, I can only tell you, go and watch it. Go at least watch the intro to give you an idea of what you are getting yourself into. The Flesh, he's super strong and super naked. Thunder Girl, she flies like thunder. Stinky Diver, a former Navy commando with an attitude as bad as his odor. And Melt Man, with the power to melt. 16 years ago, on February 10th, 2007, Cat Scratch finished its run on Nickelodeon. Created by Doug TenNapel, the show ran for one season of 20 episodes. 9 years ago, on February 8th, 2014, Monsters vs. Aliens, the series, finished its run on Nickelodeon. Based on the Monsters vs. Aliens movie, the show was developed by Marc McCorkle and Bob Schooley and ran for 26 episodes. 5 years ago, on February 10th, 2018, the final episode of Bunsen is a Beast aired on Nickelodeon. Created by Butch Hartman, the show ran for one season of 26 episodes. Out of all of Butch Hartman's works, as I've mentioned earlier this year in the January 16th episode of This Week in Nickelodeon History, this is the one that I watched the least out of all four of them. And before I recorded this episode, I decided to go down some clips of Bunsen is a Beast just to see if I found anything I liked or disliked. And the one thing I have to say is, one of the staples of a Butch Hartman cartoon that I enjoy is the title card. There is an art to the title card that Butch Hartman has understood for years. And these title cards, although they look like children's books, like the covers of books, they're beautiful. The music, the theme song that they repeat over and over and over again, needs to end halfway through. There's an end point to the song that you can hear, and then it repeats itself. And after watching a few of these title cards, which I know you're not normally supposed to watch one after another, I noticed just how annoying that musical jingle was being forced. In fact, there was one title card that had to slow it down for a dramatic effect, in which it ended at the point that I personally feel like it should end at, and it was perfect. It was like a breath of fresh air after 2 minutes of waiting to see the different variations to see if there would be another one to pop up. So, as for a positive, though, I have to say I gained a new appreciation over some of the art direction, over the character of Mikey and Amanda. I've grown to not necessarily say I like it or love it, but I accept it, and it fits more in the world as I was watching more of the show. As I was seeing more clips, they seemed to fit a little bit more, and it wasn't as jarring, because before that, most of the clips I had seen was Bunsen interacting with Butch Hartman characters in Fairly Odd Phantom, and when there were clips around of the Fairly Odd Parents crossover, which, by the way,
I think I'm calling the cops.
2 years ago, on February 8th, 2021, we had the premiere of a new game show on Nickelodeon, Tuned In. Presented by Jerry Trainer, the show is in its second season currently on Nickelodeon, and it's all about the Nicktoons. Finally, Nickelodeon created a game show about the Nicktoons, and I was today years old when I found out that Phil Moore is a producer of Tuned In. That's right, Phil Moore, the host of Nickelodeon Arcade, or Nick Arcade as it's properly known as, is a producer on Tuned In. That's even cooler than the show existing as is. It seems like a fun time, and even though I mentioned that Jerry Trainer is the presenter, it seems like this show actually has an AI robot named Nikki as its host, and that'll give you an example of how much of Tuned In I've seen. When I hear something like this, my heart explodes, but it's not necessarily enough to go, I need to watch this game show. I'm juggling so much. But if you're a fan of Tuned In and you think it's worth checking out, let me know in the comments below. The anniversaries may be over, but now it's time for Captain Eric's Top 5 of the week. And this week is another visual Top 5. When I was doing some of the notes for this week in Nickelodeon history, I noticed that 2 of the shows I was covering this week, I have items for that are signed by some of the stars of those shows. So I said, why not? Let's show off some of these items in a light manner. And this is not just a simple, this is something I own, here's a top 5 of signed items, so on and so forth. No, no, no. I like to have a treasure that has a story attached to it. It's one thing if your treasure is shiny and it glows and it's expensive, but sometimes the items that are worth the most are the ones that have the best story attached to them. So for this week's Top 5, I went through my Nickelodeon collection of signatures, and I found my top 5 items that have stories attached to them, and I will go over those stories now. Number 5 is an item I have talked about on this show before, and I'll give you the shortest summary possible. But a few years ago, I had a chance to meet one of the creative forces behind the Ren and Stimpy show, Bob Camp. I paid for him to make me a drawing. He, of course, signed that drawing, and we had an interesting text message conversation a year or 2 later. I've talked about it a few of the times we have covered the Ren and Stimpy show on This Week in Nickelodeon History. I, of course, have the drawing on the screen there for you to see. That is hanging on my wall right over there. If you want to hear that story, I'll link any of the other episodes I've talked about the Ren and Stimpy show in the podcast description below. Number 4 is the only item of all of the signed treasures of today that I didn't meet the person personally, but the story behind it is worth telling, which is why it's here. About a year or 2 ago, my brother was attending the Boston Comic-Con, and when I looked at the attendees who were going, I, of course, myself couldn't go. I noticed one name of someone who would attend this Comic-Con, and I inquired if my brother was okay if he could bring alongside an item with him to get signed by this person, and he obliged. It was totally cool. Other than the fact that my younger brother didn't speak up my name loud enough for this person. So when I received this pop, signed by Roger Bumpus, as you can see, it is too hairy. And when my brother corrected him, he, of course, has the story of being yelled at in the Squidward voice getting yelled at, but then he crossed it out and wrote Eric, Roger Bumpus. So this is great. Now, I really wanted to Eric, Roger Bumpus, and not to just have this. This, of course, is now a special treasure. This is a memory with my brother. This is its own thing. This is beyond a signature by Roger Bumpus for me. But I wanted a Roger Bumpus signature with my name. So I found someone who was going the next day, inquired about getting another Squidward pop. There is my to Eric, Roger Bumpus autograph. So the set is complete. I have 2 Roger Bumpus Squidwards. 1 blue, 1 black. Number 3 is this signed Double Dare NES game by Marc Summers in green paint marker. When I met Marc as a VIP for Double Dare Live when it came up around the New England area. And what was really interesting is when we came up to Marc Summers, I was with my mom, my girlfriend, my younger brother, and Marc Summers somehow knew my mother. I'm not sure how, but when he locked eyes with her and she said hello to Marc, and my mom is very personable. She will, I guess, make you feel like you've known her for a while. She's very comforting in that way, but instantly he gave her a hug. It was as if they have met before, and my mom, in her recollection, has no real idea who he is other than from television. She may have met him before, but it was this really surreal moment where I really wasn't sure what was going on. It's not like my mom had told me that she knew of this guy and that was my expected reaction. Either way, we had a wonderful time meeting him. He was blown away at having this in his hand and having to sign this. I have to get a case for this, by the way. But it was a wonderful time at Double Dare Live. It was a great birthday present also. It was from my mom. She wanted to experience it with me, and that's, hey, another great story associated with a piece of treasure. Number 2 may have the most exciting story behind it, but it is certainly not the most treasured story out of these last 2 items. But what I have here is a signed Good Burger DVD with Kenan Thompson's signature. Let me get that right side up. Look at that. And inside of here is the ticket stub of Kenan Thompson, November 27th, 2012. I honestly don't remember if it was a birthday gift or a Christmas gift on how I had the tickets to go see Kenan, because my birthday was around that time, but it could have been either or. Either way, during the drive from my mom's house to Yukon, which was about 45 minutes to an hour depending on weather and traffic, my car died. My car just shut off. It was dead. I don't know if it was the battery or the engine. I have no memory as to what happened with that truck, because that may have been the last leg it was on. But luckily, wherever I broke down, I was close enough to my father, who was able to not only scoop my friend and I up and drop us off at the show, but he was able to wait around until the show was over so that my friend and I were able to get back home safely. Now, we were a little late to the show from when it started, but I was lucky enough to get in line to ask Kenan a question. I don't remember exactly what my question was. I know I remembered telling him how much I loved Pierre Escargot, and I may have asked him if he had a favorite bit and all that, that he wished he did more of, a character of. But I know that I inquired about Kel at the time and whether or not they would ever work with each other again. And luckily, from that point forward, there were times that Kenan and Kel would certainly work with each other again. It was pretty much guaranteed that everybody who was asking a question was also going to ask Kenan for either an autograph or a picture. And after a few people that I had witnessed in the room, Kenan had said, hey, you don't have to ask each and every time. If you have the opportunity to ask a question, just stand off to the side and I'll take pictures and whatnot, and that'll be fine. Before I even asked my question, I mentioned to Kenan how I was late to the show. It was a big deal to be there. My car had broken down. He was, of course, super appreciative of still making it all that way, and of course to my father out waiting in the car. which was a saving grace. I didn't have to call AAA or anything and have the tow truck driver waiting out there for me like, hey, buddy, do you mind? I have a 2-hour-long engagement with Kenan Thompson. Can you just keep the car running for me? Thanks. But no, my father was nice enough to do that. And at the end of my question, I gave Kenan the thumbs up for the photo thing, and he obliged. Now, when we first got to the auditorium, I immediately ran to the Q&A line while my friend went up to our seats in the balcony. So at the end of my question, I went up to our seats, enjoyed the rest of the show, and once the show was over, through the crowd, made my way back down to where Kenan directed everyone who asked a question to go to get a picture and whatnot. And 4 or 5 of us who were in that question line were scooted away by security and the event staff. Kenan wasn't around at that moment in time. He was still getting ready in the back, but there was a solid lineup of people and gave some sort of excuse that more of Kenan's time would have to go to the people who organized this than to those who came and saw the show. And it was a crappy feeling, to be honest, after asking the question, being told, hey, you'd get a picture, and then being scooted off to the side like that. That didn't seem right at all to me. So me and one other person who was in that line who were scooted away went to the side, went to the back to try to get in touch with someone else who was in charge of this event to try to get this sorted through. And luckily, we ran into one of Kenan Thompson's security guards who was scooting away anybody who was thinking about waiting near the side doors, the back doors, anywhere near Kenan's cars. The security was on lockdown for this event. Luckily, though, the man I spoke to remembered my story of being late, showing up, having my dad wait for me, and said, wait a minute, they kicked you out? They told you you couldn't get the picture? He was pissed. Brought me right into the event room where all the organizers were meeting up, and Kenan Thompson was right in front of me. I had a few minutes to meet him. Kenan, of course, remembered the question and was nice enough to not only sign my copy of Good Burger, which I had on me because, of course, who doesn't have a copy of Good Burger on them at all times, but he signed my copy of Good Burger, took a picture with me, and was super nice to meet a fan. He was really confused as to why a few of us would have been scooted out from that meeting space. But either way, I am gracious for Kenan Thompson for rectifying that mistake or that injustice and signing my copy of Good Burger. That leads me into my number one treasure that is signed by those associated with the Nickelodeon brand. In my hands may seem like an ordinary Mr. Tasty vinyl figure, but if you not only turn it to its side, you will see a signature of Little Pete, Danny Tamborelli, and if you turn it to its top, you will have a signature by Michael C. Morona, Big Pete. And this was after a meetup of their live show, The Adventures of Danny and Mike, a show that I could not recommend enough. There really isn't a big story associated with this, but it was due to the night itself at hand when I had the chance to meet both Danny and Michael and spend an evening with them and their podcast, The Adventures of Danny and Mike. It was a wonderful live experience. It was not just talking about the show. They also had other segments that were about some of the local parts of Connecticut, and I cannot recommend it enough. If you have The Adventures of Danny and Mike coming to a city near you, do what you can to get out and meet these guys, because the VIP treatment they gave me was enough to make this my number one treasured item. This stacked up against all these other items, the feeling I had hanging out with those guys, getting to talk with them. I don't want to get too emotional on here, but they tell you to not meet your heroes, to not meet those you look up to. And when it comes to Danny and Mike, I can't recommend them enough. They genuinely made me feel good to be a fan of theirs. Not that I needed validation to like a TV show or to follow one's careers, but after spending all of that time watching, enjoying their content, seeing them grow, seeing them in other projects, and then finally getting to meet them, I could not thank Mike, Danny, and Jeremy enough for the show that they put on, The Adventures of Danny and Mike. and for the feeling they gave me as a fan of Nickelodeon and all this stuff. I think the picture you're seeing in front of you is all you need to see. What they say about a picture, it's worth 1,000 words, and if that face is not genuine joy on a human being, hey, I don't know what is. But that is going to be it for this week in Nickelodeon history. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for coming aboard to celebrate some anniversaries. It is a pleasure to have you here. If you enjoy this podcast and you would like to hear another podcast from Captain Eric, please check out I'm Ready, a SpongePod Squarecast, dropping every Thursday on most conceivable podcasting platforms, including YouTube.com. What's that? Well, you should check that out, youtube.com/@thecaptaineric. There you'll find all of my podcasts with varying degrees of video versions associated with them, alongside a plethora of other video content with more live streams coming soon. So click in the link below and subscribe to the Captain Eric YouTube channel. It is the best way to show your support for the Captain. But if you would like to go further than that, you can click on the Redbubble link in the podcast description below, where you can find a plethora of Captain Eric icons, logos, and pieces of art that you can put on a multitude of different products, including stickers, t-shirts, hats, and duvet covers, if you so please. I don't know why I'm always pushing that one. That one just seems to be one of the weirdest, like, whoa, that is an out there item that someone can purchase. But yes, there is Captain Eric duvet covers available at redbubble.com. Anything that comes in through my projects go directly back into my projects, and it is always appreciated. If you would like to follow me on social media, the links for my Twitter and Instagram are in the podcast description below, at I'm Ready Podcast on Twitter and at SpongeBob Podcast on Instagram. I am on there daily for both services. So if you'd like to interact with the Captain, that'll be your best means. Other than that, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can reach me at nickelodeonhistory@gmail.com. As always, members of the Ready crew, I appreciate your time aboard. Please stay safe, be kind to one another, and come aboard again to another episode of This Week in Nickelodeon History. Oh, you double dare. They double dare you. You're gonna do that.